All right, so this week we were talking about the growing up too fast and losing your childhood. So I want to talk about each of these points in terms of losing your childhood. This was on page 85. I'm going to go into a little more detail than the book went into, but oftentimes in dysfunctional families, the child can take on the role of caretaker. I know we've talked about that before. So usually this happens when you see that something is wrong with your family and you have to take care of your parents, both parent, or your siblings. So this could be done by physically taking care of your parents. If they're addicts, you may have to be responsible for cleaning them up when they're using drugs or drunk. It might be an emotional caretaker where your parents aren't able to give emotional support to you or your siblings, so you take on that emotional support for your siblings. It could also be where you're the emotional dump. The parents come and they just came and they would tell you all of the things that they were going through, but they didn't want to listen to what you were going through. They were dumping on you. It could be financially. You may have had to get a job to help support the family because your parents weren't able to do that. So a lot of people in dysfunctional families, they have to grow up at a young age because they have to work, they have to make decisions maybe that a child should not be having to ever make. So this is a part of losing your childhood because you were never able to be a child. As children are supposed to be able to just be a child, have that innocence, have the playing and play dates and school and sports, and you may not have been able to have that because you had to be the caretaker for your parents or your family. So you had to grow up very quickly. And it kind of gives you the label of the fixer maybe. So you may have had to fix your parents, fix the situation, and that can carry on later into life as well. And you may see that in your current families or your current friendships. You're always the one who has to fix the situation, or you have to fix people, and you neglect your own emotional needs or your own physical needs. That's where self-care, maybe you don't have good self-care because you were never able to have that growing up. So that's one way of losing your childhood, is becoming a caretaker. Another is through abuse. It could be sexual abuse, it could be physical abuse, it could be emotional abuse, or even the book was talking about religious abuse. So I want to go through each of these, and I want to focus on how these happening in childhood affects brain development. I really am fascinated by the brain and how intricate and how amazing the brain is. So each of these types of abuse affects the brain in a different way. And each of these types of abuse that happen in childhood affect the brain in a different way than if it happens when you're older. So everyone knows, or I think most people know, that your brain is not fully developed till you're 26, right? So as you're growing up, your brain is developing all the way till you're 26 years old. So with physical abuse, this often can look like impairment in the neural connections in the brain. So what this means is that every experience and every memory that you have create neural connections in the brain. And basically these neural connections help basic functioning. So if you think about these neural connections like the foundation of a house. So without the foundation of the house, you can't have the first level, you can't have the second level. So when these neural connections, when there's physical abuse, it interrupts the neural connections, and so it makes that foundation wobbly. So you're not getting as many connections, and so that can affect basic things such as regulation of emotions, that can affect academic, how you learn things, that can affect how you cognitively process things, and that can affect your attention as well. So those are some ways with the brain development. Oftentimes, if there's physical abuse, you can have poor social skills when you're a child because you're not able to understand social cues of others. So that is another piece of the brain that gets affected, is the understanding of social cues. You also don't trust people, or you could also not trust people due to the physical abuse. You tend to be on constant alert, never be able to relax, which can also cause health problems. So those are some ways for the physical abuse. With sexual abuse, Sexual abuse in general increases the likelihood of depression, poor academic achievement, and alcoholism. So if the trauma of the sexual abuse happens when you are a child, it drastically affects the brain development. So it affects the limbic system, and your body gets stuck in a survival mode, so a constant mode of survival. So you see things as unsafe, you see things as threatening. So it's similar to the physical abuse where you're kind of in that heightened state of not being able to relax. So this can also cause physical health problems. And then with the limbic system, it kind of, in a way, it overpowers the rational part of your brain, so the rational prefrontal cortex. So any reasoning or rationalization that can be affected by the sexual abuse. It basically makes the child not know what is safe or unsafe. So it causes that area of the brain, it causes them to have a really difficult time to understand the logic and the reasoning. Okay, is this person safe? I don't know if this person is safe. And it's kind of like that internal battle. With emotional abuse, it thins certain areas of the brain that help you manage emotions and be self-aware. So when you're having that emotional abuse, that you're not able to recognize and manage your emotions. So you may go from like one extreme to the other. Somebody may say something and you have like a rage instance or something like that. So it affects the part of the brain that helps you manage your emotions. So there's been studies, as I was researching this more, that emotional abuse actually has been linked to fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. So again, with really any types of abuse it can cause, because of the state that your body is in and that your brain is in, it can cause physical health symptoms as well. And with emotional abuse, another area of the brain that it causes overactivity in the amygdala. So this is the part of the brain that's responsible for processing emotions and determining reactions to stressful situations and dangerous situations. So this type of ongoing emotional abuse can actually cause overactivity in that part of the brain. And then I couldn't really find a lot of information about just abuse and how that affects the brain. So I kind of just came to my own conclusion that it probably, in my viewpoint, it probably just causes the negative associations with religion. So religious abuse basically is if you had a parent that was using religion in a negative way. So they had a very unhealthy view of religion and they were using that as a way to belittle you or make you feel bad for what you did. So this could cause negative associations with religion. And I've had quite a few clients over the years that they call it religious trauma. And they say, I was just so traumatized by how my parents used religion. When I got angry, they would say, well, you're not supposed to be angry if you're a Christian, that sort of thing. And so they want nothing to do with religion. So their brain is basically saying that is an unsafe place because this is how it was used. And so they have a very warped perception of religion. So another way that you can lose your childhood is turning off emotions. So this is when you will repress certain memories because at the time your body is unable to handle those memories. And the one thing I will say about memories is memories are a very difficult thing because memories aren't always accurate, right? If I experience the same situation as Tatiana, we're both going to have different viewpoints about what happened. So we're in the same exact situation. We both experience, for example, let's say a car accident. She'll see it from her vantage point. I'll see it from my vantage point. Both are extremely correct in our eyes, but in reality, there's probably some trueness to mine, some not true to mine, and some true to hers, and some not true to hers. So with memories, it can be a very difficult. I'm also very intrigued by memory, and I love studying about memory because of how it can be so different based on the person's perspective. So this is why, for example, if there's a sexual abuse case that goes to court, they cannot use memory as a witness because memory is subjective to the person. So when you're turning off these emotions, it can have lasting effects because then you're not fully processing it in the moment. And so when you're trying to remember it later on, your memory is not always accurate one way or the other what happened. So also with turning off emotions, you can go into a state of emotional disengagement. So this is where instead of talking about your emotions, you just, again, kind of repress them and don't talk about them, or you only talk about the good emotions. You talk about the good things that happen, the Facebook emotions, the positive things that are happening, but you don't talk about any of the hard emotions or the difficult things that are happening. So again, this can, if you continue to suppress these emotions and don't allow yourself to feel them, then like we've talked about before, it can cause health issues, it can cause mental health implications, it can cause social implications, because if you're not sharing with other people, they may feel like it's a one-sided relationship, or you might get people who know that you don't share, so you attract unhealthy people who just want to talk to you about their problems. And then the last one I want to look at for losing your childhood is choosing to survive in a harsh family environment. Did anyone ever say to you growing up when you were 10 years old, wow, I can't believe you're only 10 years old, you act so old for your age? Well, this could be a way of doing something that it kind of goes back to the caretaking a little bit. You are doing more than you should. You look around when you're growing up and you realize this is an unhealthy environment and I have to be the one to grow up. I have to be the one to survive, and surviving is pushing those emotions down and then growing up quicker than you have to. So this is another way that you can lose your childhood, because you decide, I need to grow up. I can't cope with the harsh family environment that I am in. And then the last area that I'm going to talk about in the next slide is identifying your feelings. Like we've talked about before, when you're thinking of the loss of your childhood, you may experience feelings of grief. So with grief can come many emotions: sadness, loss, anger, other emotions as well. If you look at the feelings wheel, I'm sure you could identify other emotions. And I know there's only one feelings wheel on every table, but I want you to think about or look at this feelings wheel, or think about the emotions as we're walking through each of these statements on the screen. So the first is, I lost my childhood and it feels sad. So I gave you the emotion for that one. So you may be looking at your childhood and you may be feeling sad about it. That's a component of grief, and that is a valid component of grief, and that may be what the emotion is that you're feeling right now. You may be feeling other emotions as well. So this next one says, I felt blank. So fill in the blank just to yourself. I felt blank when my needs were unmet. So when you were growing up and when you look back onto your childhood and thinking about how you had to do so much more than other people, how you didn't have your basic needs met, how you didn't have the emotions met. How does that make you feel? How are you processing that? And then the next one is, I felt blank when no one validated my feelings. So when you tried to go to your parents and they dismissed how you were feeling, how did that feel to you? How did that feel for them to say, no, you can't be angry, you can't be sad, you can't be hurt? The next one in identifying your feelings is connecting the past with your present. So it is important to understand how to connect the past to how you're currently feeling. So sometimes you may be, I've had clients, how are you feeling? I'm angry. What's the emotion under it? Because everyone knows anger is a secondary emotion, right? So that means there's always another emotion attached to it. And they say, no, there's no other emotion. And then that's when I challenge them to look deeper and look at the emotion wheel and say, okay, what other emotions are attached to this anger? Because under anger, there's other things. There's grief, there's sadness, there's pain, there's hurt, there's disappointment. So what do you do with that anger now? If you look back at your childhood and you think, I'm just so angry. What are the other emotions involved in that anger? Are you feeling hurt? Are you feeling frustrated? Are you feeling sad? What are these other emotions? And that's why I love the feelings wheel, because when you think of emotions, you think of happy, sad, angry, the basic ones that everyone talks about, but there's so many more that can more accurately describe how you're feeling, and sometimes we just don't even realize what these emotions are. I've had some clients be like, I didn't even know that was an emotion after looking at the feelings wheel, and it can really open your eyes to, okay, what's behind this anger? There's more than just anger, there's other pieces to it. And then how do you express your sadness now? So is there sadness for the loss of your childhood? And how do you express that? How does that come out in your day-to-day life with your kids, with your spouse, with your friends? How is that showing itself now? And then the last one with identifying your feelings is validating your emotions. So again, telling yourself all these emotions are okay to have when processing your childhood. You were told your whole life that maybe your emotions weren't valid, that you're not supposed to feel this way, you're not allowed to feel this way. Your parents didn't have time for you to feel this way because they were the ones that had to express their emotions. But allowing yourself to validate your emotions instead of saying, oh yeah, somebody else has it worse. Say, no, I'm sad and I can be sad and that's okay. These emotions are good. These emotions are normal to have, instead of trying to push them away. So instead of when you do get triggered, allowing yourself to feel that emotion. I know sometimes our natural response, if we get triggered and have an unwanted emotion of, say, sadness or wanting to cry, we try to just push that down. So instead of doing that, allow yourself to cry, allow yourself to feel that sadness. Identify the emotion, identify the thought behind it, identify the behaviors associated with it, and then work through the emotion. So it kind of goes back to that CBT triangle that Tatiana talked about a few weeks ago, with the emotions and the thoughts and the behaviors all being connected. And so looking at each of those with the emotion, allowing yourself to feel it, and then moving through that emotion instead of pushing it down. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Tatiana to do the characteristics of an adult child.
So the characteristics of an adult child, if you're following along, we're on page 94. So the first thing is, let's go ahead and define what an adult child is. And so if you did your homework, you should know by now that an adult child is a child who in some areas thinks or acts like an adult. And so if you were told as a child, wow, you are so mature for your age, or if you were told, you have such an old soul, maybe you were an adult child. And so as we go through the characteristics, what I would like for you to do is follow along on page 94, 95. And if what is being taught today during my 2 slides resonates with you, I want you to put a dot or an asterisk, and maybe you can talk about it in your small groups. So the characteristics of an adult child, again, put yourself in 5-year-old you, 10-year-old you, 15-year-old you. The first thing is that they have to guess at what normal behavior is. And so this is partly because in the household, there was no communication of boundaries, no communication of expectations, no communication of standards. And so what happens is you don't really know what normal looks like. So you go around guessing, you are navigating in different spaces, whether it's school or with your friends, of, is what I'm doing actually normal? The next characteristic is difficulty following a project through from beginning to end. Did you have a difficult time with finishing essays or finishing a project with a friend? This may be partly because you had feelings of overwhelm, and rightly so. If there was constant chaos in the house, how could you have the mental and emotional capacity to deal with the homework assignment? Or it could be because you had a lack of confidence and clarity. No one really paved the way for you as a child on what right looks like. And so you definitely had a difficult time following through on projects. The next one is lie when it would be just as easy to tell the truth. So when you are an adult child, image is absolutely everything when you are in a dysfunctional household. So everyone in the household is aware of the dysfunction. You are also aware, but no one else outside of the home can know that us, the family, is dysfunctional. So image is everything, and you learn that at a very, very young age. So you go through life maybe lying to protect your image. This is a characteristic of an adult child. The next one is you judge yourself without mercy. A few weeks ago, I talked about how the way that our parents spoke to us, that becomes our internal voice. And so if your parents were hypercritical, very judgmental, it's only obvious that you too are also going to internalize this very judgmental, hypercritical voice. The next characteristic is difficulty having fun. So as a 5, 10, 15-year-old, did you have a difficult time letting your hair down and playing with Barbie dolls or imagination activities with other neighborhood friends? Fun was not a priority in the house. And so, of course, when you get around your peer groups, it's very difficult for you to play. That characteristic rolls into the next one, which is you take yourself very seriously. And this makes sense because if you had high expectations from your parents to perform, to do, to meet their needs, of course, you're going to take yourself very seriously as well. The next characteristic is difficulty with intimate relationships. So if there was a lot of dysfunction in the house and your caregivers did not meet your physical, emotional needs, you learned, I can't trust my caregivers. And maybe there's an internalized belief there that says, I can't trust anyone. And so it's very hard for you to maybe connect. In the past, maybe you had a difficult time making friends and you felt like a loner. And so maybe that has followed you to today as well, maybe having your walls up. The next characteristic is overreacting to changes. As a 5-year-old, as a 10-year-old, as a 15-year-old, did you have that behavior? Was that modeled in the household where maybe there was the slightest inconvenience and you just saw your parents blow up? It could be modeled behavior. That's why we might also, as adult children, overreact to changes. The next one is constantly seek approval and affirmation. This is a normal response as an adult child because as an adult child, you don't want to ruffle any feathers. You already know there's going to be chaos and dysfunction, and you don't want to be the reason for that. And so the reason for you seeking approval and affirmation is to ensure that you're on the right track. Keep mom and dad happy. I will not be the reason why mom and dad are not happy. Another characteristic of an adult child is that they feel that they are different from other people. I want you to ask yourself this question. Did you feel out of place with your peers? When you went to school, did you feel as though maybe you were the only one dealing with whatever you were dealing with? That is a very common characteristic of an adult child. The next one is super responsible or super irresponsible. And if you were here for the first week, you can recall the 5 roles of the children. The chief enabler, family hero are very, very responsible. The chief enabler has to take care of the image of the family and protect the family at all costs, while the family hero brings honor and glory to the family. So they would be considered super responsible, whereas maybe the scapegoat or the mascot would be super irresponsible. If you can recall, the scapegoat is the one who's constantly stirring up trouble. The mascot is the one who brings comedic relief to the family. Another characteristic is that they are extremely loyal. Did you find yourself being extremely loyal to those, even when those were not loyal to you? Were you asked to hide a secret? No one can know about this or else. Or were you asked to do something even when you knew that something that was being asked was off, wrong? That is a characteristic of an adult child, being extremely, extremely loyal. And the last one is that adult children are impulsive. This could be because that is the observed behavior that was in the household. You saw your parents being impulsive, and so therefore maybe that's what you learned was the standard. Or maybe you just simply were not taught how to manage your impulses. And so with that being said, the next slide talks about reclaiming your childhood, and I'll pass it over to my friend Gissel.
Thanks, Tatiana. I appreciate being here because I know that the church and the Bible is one of your strengths, and I like to have the opportunity to use that when I talk to you. So to reclaim your childhood, I would say it's very important for us to remember who we are. Someone made in God's image, worth dying for. If you had a critical parent, that critical voice may have become part of your thought process. And the Bible says, guard your thoughts. In counseling, we talk about paying attention to your thoughts and how your thoughts lead to actions, and how the thoughts and actions lead to feelings. And another thing that would be useful in reclaiming your childhood is to remember that God has a plan for you, to prosper you, to give you hope and a future. It's also important to acknowledge the pain that you have been through. Do not harden your heart. Ezekiel 36:26 says, I will replace your heart of stone with a heart of flesh. And there's another verse that says, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. Claim the positive memories of your childhood. I read a long time ago that recalling a present memory has the same effect on the brain as actually experiencing the event. So, if you're having a stressful day, I would recommend you take a time to remember a beautiful time you spent at a beautiful place. What was that like? What was the temperature? What were the sounds? What were the sights? Who were you with? What was that like? Close your eyes and relive that moment. You're rewiring your brain and nurture your inner child. This reminds me of something that Jesus said, that you will not enter the kingdom of heaven unless you're like a child. And when I was a child, I was like, what? Like how can that be? But it stayed with me, and I always liked children, even as a child. But when I grew up, I paid attention to them, how they stayed in the moment, like when they were playing with water, it was just them in the water. They were present. They weren't thinking what they were going to do next. They weren't thinking about what happened before. They were right there in the moment, enjoying each experience. And if we can do that for ourselves, that is so healing. God is with me and I will not fail. You may have the critical parents say, you're not good enough, you can't do this. If God is with you, you cannot fail. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I am never alone. Jesus said, I will never leave you or forsake you, and I'm with you till the end of the age. And God made me and Christ made me good enough.